I know some people that work with the Newsnight quite well.
Right.
And she was not a very nice person to work with. I've known Alastair Campbell for a long time. He's a curious character, Alastair Campbell. He's done some pretty bad things in his life. He was famously a massive bully. Once I was on the air and he leant behind my ear.
It's not my responsibility.
And that's what he's like.
There's a lot of sort of crying mental health as well.
Yes. Rory Stewart. I mean, what can you say about him?
What can you say
just a really weird guy. He gets everything wrong. So that guy, I mean, what a complete numpty he is. Possibly the worst journalist of all time. James O'Brien, for example.
Do you think he uses burner accounts?
I think he does. People like Robert Peston, the man who can't ask a question that takes less than 15 minutes. Just ask the bloody question, okay? Ordinary people need a bit of information.
This is no time to sit on the sidelines.
Horrendous times that we lived through because these people thought that they were in charge of our lives.
Hi guys, can you please do me a favour? We're trying to make sure over 50% of you viewers subscribe. Please hit subscribe now. It's free and helps us grow. It's a pleasure having you here. I love that you got the wine and everything.
Yeah.
You're a sophisticated guest.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah,
see what it's like at the end of the hour.
We will. Yeah. Just completely sloshed on the floor.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that. I'm going to ask you about, I wanted to talk about sort of the fakeness of the media on both sides and those things, but there's also a couple of topical stories I just want to hear about from you.
Yeah.
And one of them was the 26,000 criminals, is it, that have been released? What's going on?
Well, it turns out that Labour have only been in for just over a year, but they've somehow managed to release 26,000 criminals, many of whom were sent to prison for more than 10 years, more than 14 years. You don't get sent to prison in this country really for a very long time. If you've been committing crimes. Normally, I think the average is you've probably committed about 35 crimes before you actually get a custodial sentence. And to get more than 10 years, you've had to do something pretty bad. And so because they've sort of panicked about absolutely almost anything that you can think of, this sort of government of panic, there seems to be somebody shouts at them and they go, oh, what are we going to do now? Oh, I know. Let's get loads of people out of prison. And of course, we watched them and we had a camera on Brixton Prison and a couple of other prisons, back at the end of last year in the autumn. People were coming out in various different states. Some of them, were really happy and they were walking into the arms of friends of theirs. People were getting into Lamborghinis. People were opening bottles of champagne. And these were like serious criminals being driven off in like really. There was one guy got into a Rolls Royce. These were, seriously bad people. And about, I think a third of them got taken back in. A couple of people were released who were like domestic violence abusers, and the women that they'd abused weren't told they were coming out, that kind of thing. Oh. And a couple of the sex offenders went and committed more sex offences and had to go back in. I mean, the whole thing is out of control. And it seems the only place where it's even more mad than outside the prison is actually inside the prison, where they're having sex with each other, where women for some reason they've got women prison officers in male prisons, which I can't understand why you would do that.
No.
You might remember the woman who was filmed having sex. They're smoking joints. They're getting drone deliveries of everything from cocaine to sort of, microwave ovens. It's the whole thing is a complete mess. And we wonder why the streets of Britain are slightly more dangerous than they've ever been.
What's if you're in Starmer's head, what's he thinking? Why is he doing this?
I can't imagine what's going on in his head because he doesn't appear to have any kind of strategy at all. He comes out with he's got this ludicrous social media kind of team who put out ridiculous tweets. When I said I was going to lock people up, I meant it. Like he's like Mr. Thug. Hard. Yeah. He did a podcast with Nick Robinson, I think it was, where he said, I'm a hard bastard. And everyone's going, no, you're really not a hard bastard. You're actually a bit of a wanker, to be honest. And he doesn't seem to have any strategy. Everything he does turns out not to be true. He tells lies. I mean, I've had people, Downing Street actually complained about me saying that he was a liar. And so ever since then, every single show, I get somebody else to call him a liar because everybody thinks he is one. I got Kemi Badenoch to do it the other day. Any politician that comes on from Tory or Reform, they just call him a liar. Almost any pundit that I get on, if I ask, is Keir Starmer a liar? Of course he is. Today's lie, because there is one every day, is that he promised that the Chagos Islands deal would cost less to the country than the running of basically a battleship. Which is about £93 million. And he said it was going to be about £3 billion overall, the whole amount of money that we were going to give to Chagos in order to let them take it off our hands. Turns out he was out by a factor of 10, and a freedom of information request from the Daily Telegraph was discovered that actually the real amount is £35 billion. And when people said that, the Tories said it at the time, and I'm no fan of the Tories, by the way, when they accused him of wasting £35 billion of our money, he said it was irresponsible rubbish. And he just denies things and lies about things. I don't imagine, I can't imagine what it's like to be inside his head.
It's a weird one, isn't it?
It's very weird. And he's clearly a very kind of troubled individual, it seems to me.
Do you think?
Know? I think so.
As just a person.
Yeah. He's very awkward. I've never seen anybody so awkward in my life, particularly as a politician. People say, oh, well, he's not really a politician. He's more of a kind of manager. But he's a terrible manager, if that's what he is. You know, he's a terrible judge of character. You know, look at all the people he's hired to be in his cabinet who've had to resign as a result of some, I'm going to say misdemeanor, but some things more serious than that. And he's just, I don't think anyone expected him to be this useless. Yeah. That's what I think surprises me.
We didn't have high hopes, did we?
I mean, I knew that I wouldn't like much of what he wanted to do. I knew that I wouldn't have much agreement with his politics, but I didn't think he'd be quite as rubbish at actually running it.
You know what's interesting? I mean, you've had a long, illustrious career in journalism. And for me, at least getting to these kinds of levels where I'm able to talk to, say, politicians, it's very new to me now. It's the last year or two. And one thing that's really struck me, it's something that I've always heard said about politicians, but actually meeting them, I thought it was just said and wasn't necessarily true, but they're very strange people. I cannot believe how odd all of these people. And do you think, is politics just is it the type of person who wants to be a politician is often a bit odd?
Yeah. I mean, I'd had it once described to me that the House of Commons and the whole Westminster Parliament is a bit like a school would be if they didn't have any bullies. You know, which is quite an interesting way to look at it. You know, I'm not suggesting that bullies are things that should be good, but it's a bit like all the nerds have kind of taken over and they're all running it and nobody gives them a slap for being a nerd, and they just have very odd, strange interests. They have strange peccadillos. They're very, very awkward, a lot of them socially, particularly around women. If they're gay, they're very weird about it. You know, they're kind of not very good around boys. You know, they've got this kind of, I mean, Parliament was a terror. I mean, I don't know if it's any better now, but when I was down there a lot in 2019, we spent a lot of time down there because of Brexit, and we were on the College Green every day. And so you were kind of enmeshed in going to the pubs around there. And it's just a very weird place, because you've got these young kids who come in who kind of idolize the older politicians. And there's all kinds of sexual scandals and people doing terrible things to one another. And it's just a very odd place because they're all fascinated by what they do. Yeah. But in a funny sort of way, in a kind of a geeky way, And very occasionally you meet someone who's actually brilliant and you go, actually, right, well, not every politician is a weirdo, but most of them are.
Yeah. I mean, we had Liz Truss here and I actually really liked her. But I think, I don't know if she'd admit this, but I was going to say, even she would say, but she is a bit weird.
She is.
People they're all just a bit odd and robotic.
Yeah, they really are. And they kind of, many of them are always on their guard all the time as well. I've got to know quite a few, and so sometimes they'll relax a little bit, but they're still a bit jumpy about everything. And they, particularly the ones who are in a position of power, they don't want to answer questions. I mean, if you ask a question, you expect the person to answer it. But these guys have spent years practicing not answering questions. Yeah. And they just, I don't know what they're frightened of.
You ever search for a news story and no matter where you click, it's all the same spin, same agenda, and you still don't know what's actually true? That's because big tech buries results, pushes paid content, and tracks everything you do. That's why I use FreeSpoke. It's search reimagined. FreeSpoke puts you in control, showing you news from across the spectrum, clearly labelled for bias. No hidden censorship, no creepy profiling, no targeted ads, just answers to your questions. As someone who believes in free speech and heretics, viewpoint diversity, and hearing all sides of a story, I genuinely love what FreeSpoke is doing. It's the first AI tool built to support independent voices with podcast clips, video commentary, and articles all in one place. It's clear, fast, and lets you think for yourself. So do what I did. Download the FreeSpoke app and subscribe today. Use my link freespoke.com/gold to get 35% off FreeSpoke Premium and take back control of your search. It was a weird. I was recently on LBC, and there was Ian Dale was there, and James Bloodworth, who I was he was an adversary of mine.
Yeah, I know James.
We were having a go at each other, but before and after, it's all, hey mate, how you doing? Yeah. Nice to meet you, nice to see you, and all that. Yeah. But then we also had a Labour politician. It's not fair. I mean, maybe to repeat, but people can see who it was. Yeah. Just sort of odd and limp, and just like hello, and then bye bye, and nothing.
Right. Yeah, no, weird. I think they are socially inept, a lot of them. And Starmer is more than most socially inept because you see him. I mean, there was some footage last week of him at a sort of a library where he was talking to some kids who were playing some instruments. And it was just really cringe making. You know, you want to leave the room when you're not even in it. You know, you kind of go, I can't even watch this. It's like talking to kids as though they're adults. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a father, but, you know, if you have children, you sort of know how to talk to them. He's got children, but he doesn't know how to talk to them. I find that odd.
Maybe Obama and I think of like Trump. They're not that. They know how to talk and work a crowd.
Well, Blair was like that. I mean, Blair was very good at that. You know, he didn't have to be coached, and you shouldn't have to be coached really to be. If you want to be a politician, like Nigel Farage, you know, he's very good around people. You know, people feel comfortable. They don't mind going up to him and talking to him. Whereas Keir Starmer is he's always like stiff, and he looks as if he's worried somebody's going to say something he can't deal with.
Why did he want to be a politician?
I don't know.
I don't get it.
I don't know.
Do you trust Reform and Farage, who is a personality, to sort this out?
I do. I think, I mean, I've known Nigel Farage quite a long time. I know that there are people now out there who say, oh, he's joined the establishment, he's part of the elite. I'm not really buying that. I don't think that's true. I think Reform are the only party that's got a chance of actually, you know, breaking up the uni party, if you want to call Labour and the Conservatives that. I mean, the rest of them really don't have a chance of doing that at all. They're on the fringes. So, but Reform, you know, and I speak to Nigel a fair amount. You know, there are things that he's done that people haven't liked. But when you hear his version of what's happened, you kind of go, well, that kind of makes sense.
It's often the way, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
So
people who
sides.
are not very happy with how they've been treated in Reform and that he's this kind of, you know, mono glot and he has to be in charge. Well, it's kind of his party, you know. I mean, he's the guy that makes it sing. Without him, they wouldn't have the seats they've got. Without him, they wouldn't have the popularity they've got. So, you know, sometimes I think you have to go, well, okay, he's in charge. You just have to go along with what he wants. You know, this idea of democratizing political parties is all very well, but it's a bit sort of pie in the sky.
This was the conversation I just had with Ben Habib, who you just saw between, you know, and Ben, I was trying to make this point to Ben that in many respects Farage has been the most influential politician in the last 50 years.
Yeah, no question.
So,
does he disagree with that then?
Well, of course, that's why he started Advance, isn't
Right.
he? He's livid about Farage, and they're sort of enemies in that sense now.
Right.
But he said he sees Advance in some respects as a mechanism to keep Farage to the right or whatever, you know.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, you know, Farage's version of events is that they had the election, they won 5 seats. Ben Habib was not one of those seats, and at the time he was deputy leader of the party. Farage went to him and said, since you're not in Westminster, I'm going to make Richard Tice the deputy because he's in the parliamentary group. And then he kicked off about it. That's his version. So, I mean, it seems to me that if you're in Parliament, if you're in Westminster, it makes sense for the deputy to also be an MP, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, it does. And then Ben would say that's not the point. The point is this and that. It's so tough with
I know.
all this infighting and stuff. And it does split the vote. I mean, he says it doesn't split the vote, but it splits the vote a bit.
It does a bit. I mean, I don't think it splits it as much as he thinks it will. I think that's part of the problem, you know. And of course, there are, you know, one of the main bones of contention is the whole Tommy Robinson question. You know, Nigel Farage will not have Tommy Robinson anywhere near the party. He thinks he's toxic. He thinks he's bad for their image. I think he's right about that. I think, you know, getting into bed with him is probably a mistake.
Yeah, I think I like Tommy, but I think he probably is right about that. It's just not going to help them get into power.
Right.
But then there's also this kind of you know, pandering to sort of trans stuff at the moment. Farage was doing. Did you see that about?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on which way you take that. I mean, he hired this woman, Vanessa Frake, who I have had on my show quite a few times, and she knows about prisons. You know, she ran one, so she knows a lot more than you and I put together about prisons. And when I heard her argument, as much as, you know, I'm not in favour of putting, you know, men in dresses into women's prisons, her argument was quite sensible in as much as she said, look, I'm not going to blanket ban trans women, because if there's a woman who has been, or a man who has been a woman and lived as a woman and had the operation and had the hormones and changed into a woman, you can't really put that person into a men's prison, which I think is a valid point. I'm not sure I would go along completely agree with it, you know. Because since then I've spoken to other people who went, no, you can actually put them in a men's prison. You can put them in a place where they're not going to get beaten up.
Yeah.
But, you know, you'd have to put them in some kind of protective custody, if you like, you know.
Yeah. But I think this is what people like about you as a journalist, though, is that you are willing to go, these are my beliefs and my convictions.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with this person,
Right.
but it was an interesting point they made,
Right.
and let's interact with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, you know, on reflection, I would say I probably would also disagree with her. And I would and I think there was a moment of confusion. I think it shows you as well that when you get a party with like Reform, they haven't thought about every single subject under the sun. They haven't got necessarily a policy. And then they all came out the next day and were very clear that, we will not put any men in women's prisons. Fine, okay, if that's your policy. Then you better tell the person you've just hired to be the prisons, advisor, because she doesn't seem to know that. And so they're learning as they go as well, because politics is tough and there's a lot of people out to get them. Let's face it, there's lots of people trying to catch them out all the time.
I suppose I would have said to this woman, what was her name?
Vanessa Frake.
Yeah, I would have said, well, there's a lot of vulnerable people in prisons. You know, there are just geeky guys or gay fellas.
Yeah.
What do you do with them? Unfortunately,
some of them are gay in prison and then not gay when they come out of prison, which is even more strange.
Yeah. Well, what is that? Because what gives them something to do in there?
I think that's their kind of logic. They're like, well, I'm in prison. What do you expect me to do? It's like, well, not that.
I can't imagine. I'm not trying to show off my heterosexuality. I cannot imagine getting to that point.
No,
but we've not been in prison.
No. I've been in prisons to look at what they're like. I've never been sent to one.
Yeah.
I was once in a death row in Tennessee,
bloody hell.
Which was pretty intense. And the governor who was showing me around, because I'd gone down to see this boot camp for sort of young offenders, which was really successful. And they were like, none of them ever committed any crime again because they were so terrified of going back. But he took me into the electric chair death chamber.
Jesus.
And was like, "You want to sit in the chair?" I was like, "Not really."
Did you not do it?
No. I'm like, I really don't want to sit in the chair.
I wouldn't.
Apart from anything else, I'm like, why won't he switch it on and go? Don't like journalists, where you go.
I would not sit in that chair.
No, I thought that's not one for the family album, is it?
Yeah. Do they still use those now?
I don't think they do anymore.
Yeah.
But
I think that film, Green Mile.
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
Yeah, I know. No, I mean, death row is kind of something that is less and less of a thing in America now, because an awful lot more states, I think, have done away with the death penalty than there are that have still got it,
Would you have the death penalty?
I think I might have it for paedophiles and for really, really horrible criminals like Ian Huntley, who killed those 2 little girls, like Fred West, who murdered so many little girls. I don't want them to be sitting in a prison somewhere being paid for by us.
Yeah. I get that.
But I'm also squeamish about, the state murdering people.
Yeah, and then once you've got the law, does it get misused? And does someone who's innocent ends up...
I mean, one of the problems we got now is that nobody trusts the government, right? And so under those circumstances, would you trust them to have a death penalty? I'm not sure.
They'd be getting rid of us.
I mean, these are people who are literally locking people up because they want to. That's where we are now.
Lucy Connolly would probably
Lucy Connolly
should be on death row.
She probably would be.
Bloody hell. The one about the pedos, as you say, I mean, there's one thing killing them, but they're in prison for like a few months. That is unbelievable to me. I don't get it. I don't. What is the thought behind that? Whereas Lucy Connolly's like 2-3 years.
Makes no sense, does it? And the only explanation you can have is that she was stitched up, massively stitched up, as everybody was who was arrested under those circumstances. Because, again, Keir Starmer, the liar, will say, "Oh, we absolutely had nothing to do with the prosecution of those people. They all pleaded guilty." And you go, "Well, yeah, but they pleaded guilty because their lawyers told them to plead guilty. They're not sophisticated, hardcore criminals. If you or I got arrested, and somebody said, 'Why don't you just plead guilty and you'll get away with it and it'll be fine,' you'd go, okay, then."
Yeah, of course it was, yeah.
And then suddenly they all got, she never saw the light of day from the moment she was arrested. So they never let her out on bail. They never let her home to see her family. They still haven't let her home to see her family. It's outrageous what they're doing to her.
Because she wrote a stupid post.
She wrote a stupid post. People do it all the time,
My family all do it.
Yeah. Well, I've done it in the past. I mean, I don't think I've ever suggested burning down a hotel. But nobody thinks she meant that. I mean, she didn't actually want people to burn down the hotel. She was annoyed, like we all were. As it now turns out, all of the areas, I don't know if you know this, but there was a memo to Cabinet back in September, which revealed that all of the areas where there was trouble were areas where they'd sent a bunch of Afghan refugees who had been brought into the country secretly, all been put into these hotels. And suddenly people were going, what's going on with all these hotels? We're seeing it now. This morning we reported a lot on the protests over the weekend. Pretty much every town in Britain now, there's a migrant hotel protest going on. And Starmer's ignoring it as if it's not happening. He won't talk about it.
I stayed in one that they wanted, John Mappin's one in
Camelot,
Camelot Castle.
Yeah.
I stayed there.
He's an interesting character.
I know.
Anyway.
I know. Well, he's into things, and he and I had a discussion about that because I was going down to stay there and do these things, and we both agreed that the other things were sort of off the table kind of things,
Yeah.
and let's focus on the story at hand, which was
Right.
the migrant one. So,
Yeah.
because I used to run a whole channel that was very anti-Scientology.
Okay.
So I was really in on the science. And it's a funny thing because when you do speak with someone, and I do like him very much, John, but when you speak to these people and they say, no, it's not a Scientology thing, they'll say little things every now and then, which because I know a lot of insider Scientology stuff, I knew was Scientology. For example, halfway through our conversation, because he came on here and he just said, oh, yeah, I've got a cure for dyslexia, you know. And I thought, because I didn't know at the time.
Right.
And I went, that sounds very Scientology to me. And it turned out. Because Tom Cruise believes he cured his dyslexia with.
Right. It's easy to be a Scientologist when you're Tom Cruise, though, isn't it? Because nobody's going to question you, really. Everywhere you go, they're all just going to go, yeah, okay, Tom.
Yeah, he's doing all right.
He's doing fine. He's got plenty of money.
John Travolta's doing all right.
Yeah.
My understanding is people who are ex-Scientologists and who are sort of reporting about it, they hate Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
Because
Well, his ex-wife's one of them, isn't she?
which one?
The first one.
The first one. She was. I don't know if she still is.
I think she got out of it.
She got him into it.
Yeah.
And then there was Nicole and Katie.
Yeah, this was before Nicole.
Yeah. But they hate him.
Amy somebody? Can't remember.
I can't remember the name right now. See, when I used to do the channel, it was called Tip of the Tongue kind of thing. And but Travolta, everyone seems to love. They go, oh, he's a nice guy. He just, fell into this, and that's what he does.
Right.
But there was the masseur stories as well with Travolta.
There were. The thing is with Hollywood, again, a bit like politicians, most people, I think maybe they don't start out being weird, but because of what happens, they become weird. I mean, I used to work for the News of the World years ago in America, and we did all sorts of stories on John Travolta, some of which we never published. Some of which were, not provable, but, these guys are so fated and so kind of pampered. And some of the sex they get up to is so weird and wild because they get bored. They just, they've done everything. So suddenly there's, I'm not saying this is about Travolta, but there's sort of shipping in a, lorry load of dwarfs or something, so to have sex and to have an orgy with. It's just bizarre.
You'll tell me about the Travolta stuff after. You started your career in more, as we all do, I suppose, in the mainstream role. You were reporting about the Bosnian War. Things like that. When did you start to feel that something in that mainstreamy world? Because TalkTV is outside of that, I would say.
Well, it is, except it isn't, because it's still part of the news empire, so it's part of the Murdoch empire. So it's kind of, it occupies a space, I would say, outside of what you might call the mainstream kind of broadcasting media. But it's still very much part of a large organisation, so we're not, I would never pretend that we're sort of like a pirate radio station or anything like that, because we're not. But I think it was around about the Brexit time, really, when we realised that there was something different about what we were doing and something different about what people were saying to us than you would hear anywhere else. You put the BBC on and there would be all these kind of stories about how great the European Union was and how safe it was for us to be part of it and how we shouldn't leave it, and anybody who wants to leave it must be either a racist or an idiot or a bigot or somebody with low IQ. It was around about that sort of time, around about sort of 2017, 2018. And then 2019 was the year that we kind of took off, because that was when we went down to College Green in Westminster and became part of the Westminster bubble. And nobody really wanted us there. And it was great. That was great, because you felt we had this tiny little tent that was kind of way at the back, and looking over there, you could see this huge, 2-story BBC colossus, and similarly for Sky and ITV, they all had these really big studios with lights and stuff. At night, you could see them. And we just sat sort of near the entrance, and we were just grand. We had these two very glamorous looking Spanish women working for us who were sort of producers, and they used to just corral these politicians who would be just like, oh yeah, we'll come and talk to you. They didn't know who we were. And then they'd sit down and I'd sort of monster them. And it was great. It was so much fun. And I realised then that politicians really are not very smart.
That's the
I
thing.
remember Michael Heseltine called me impertinent.
Impertinent?
Yeah. I said, in order for me to be impertinent to you, I would have to think that you were superior to me. I said, which I don't. So I can't be impertinent. I'm sorry. It's a wrong use of the word. And he just looked at me, because people don't talk to them like that. I just said, I'm not having it.
Is there then a fakeness in that mainstream?
Totally, because a lot of the Westminster journalists in particular, their lifeblood depends on favours from PRs and favours from, the lobby, and making sure that they behave in a way which is not likely to upset anybody. And so, I understand when I get some mainstream journalists on, and if it's hard for me to get them to call Keir Starmer a liar, because they know that they'll get punished by the Downing Street machine. And they won't get a question asked. And, even same goes with Lindsay Hoyle. Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House, MPs are not allowed to slag him off. And I've had Reform MPs on the show, And I've said, what about Lindsay Hoyle and all these free trips he keeps taking around the world, where he's going to, Nevis and the Bahamas to talk about, the importance of Parliament. I'm like, he's on a jolly, there's no question. And they don't want to slag him off, because if they do, they miss out on, when Prime Minister's questions comes around, they don't get a question. They get punished by the system.
Are there times when you've watched journalists on TV and you've gone, this is just theatre?
Yeah. Well, during COVID, for a start, people like Robert Peston, the man who can't ask a question that takes less than 15 minutes,
Yeah.
I remember once I was in the car, and in those days when we'd all be tuning into, the press conference at 5 o'clock, and I remember getting in the car and I was driving and he started his question. A friend of mine rang me and I was on the phone for about 10 minutes, put the phone down. He was still asking the question. He hadn't actually got to the end of it, and he's so kind of, I would say kind of it's a vanity project for people like Peston. He's trying to prove himself to be cleverer than the politicians. So he's trying to use long words. He's trying to kind of...
I hate that.
Yeah. And it's like, just ask the bloody question, okay? Ordinary people need a bit of information. Don't just keep like Beth Rigby kept saying, why have you not done this faster? And why have you not locked it down more quickly than this? Why are we, people allowed to walk around? And we were going, hang on a minute. We're asking, why are people not being allowed to walk around? Why are you not asking that? And we weren't very often as an organisation in that press conference, because it was all very cosy, and it would always start with the same three people. It was Robert Peston, Beth Rigby, and whoever was the BBC political editor, I can't remember who it was. And that was how they started every press conference every day. Boris Johnson standing there with Chris Whitty and his bloody graphs that were all to cock and which were all, fake in many ways, because they didn't start them where they should have started, and they started them sort of where it suited them, so that it looked a lot worse than it was, all of that stuff. I mean, we've been talking about Nicola Sturgeon this week because she's got a new book out. Horrendous times that we lived through because these people thought that they were in charge of our lives, and we worked out quicker than most at Talk that this was all cobblers, And, what's the difference? You can go into a pub and sit down at a table of 6, but you can't sit down at a table of 8. You can have a Scotch egg and that means you're okay. As long as you go in one side and buy a pint and walk out the other side and drink it over there, that's okay. It was just rubbish. And, I think we, after Brexit, kind of built on that. And suddenly we realised we were the outriders. There were people in government taking names and putting them on a list. Me and Julie Hartley-Brewer were on a list of kind of, recidivists and, rebels and people who should be watched.
Heretics.
Yeah, heretics. Yeah. Very much so.
Sturgeon also, she came out and said she regrets how she was with the trans stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she's had some very strange responses to some of the questions she's been asked. And she came out and said that she doesn't view her sexuality as binary. And she was actually asked by Julie, what does that actually mean? And then she didn't explain it. She went, well, it means what it says. And so you're non-binary then. So are you going to tell us that you've got a relationship going with a woman? I'm not going to get into a relationship. I've just, got out of a marriage. I mean, she's clearly trying to tell people that she's bisexual. I don't really care, right? Yeah. But why don't you just say it?
I just don't even know why I want to know about Nicola Sturgeon's sexuality.
Yeah, I know. What I mean? Well, I used to know her quite well.
Oh, maybe you know then.
Not that well. But no, we used to go out for drinks and stuff when she was, a youngish politician, 31, 32, around then, about 2005. And she was sort of deputy leader to Alex Salmond, and she was good fun. She used to flirt. She was quite normal, but I don't know what happened to her.
One of the things that frustrates me, I see a lot of the sort of those mainstream paragons of legacy-ness.
Yeah.
Emily Maitlis,
yeah.
Rory Stewart, Alastair Campbell. They sort of get to have a foot in both worlds in a sense, because now they've got their podcasts and things. They give off an impression of independence.
Yeah.
And yet it's just regurgitating the same nonsense with no curiosity. Do you ever listen to any of them? Have you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've known Alastair Campbell for a long time. I mean, he once, and he's a curious character, Alastair Campbell. Because he's done some pretty bad things in his life. When he was running Downing Street for Tony Blair, he was famously a massive bully. He used to ring news desks up and start threatening them and start shouting at them. He used to phone up the BBC if he didn't like the fact that they were leading with a story that wasn't about Tony Blair. And he'd be shouting and effing and blinding,
Malcolm Tucker.
Very Malcolm Tucker.
Was that actually a good...
Yeah. So I mean, he was the inspiration for that, no question.
And is it a good, apart from the Scottishness, is it a good sort of portrayal?
Oh, very much so. Very much so.
That's mental.
It is. but that was his world, and he held a very, very, because he was the first proper kind of, I don't know if he was appointed as a civil servant, but he was the first proper kind of PR machine. Now, Bernard Ingham was Margaret Thatcher's guy, but he was very much old school civil service. He wasn't the kind of bloke that would pick up a phone and start shouting at people or pushing them out of the way. But Campbell's quite a big guy. It's quite an imposing figure as well, and he would physically intimidate people too.
Is he big?
Yeah, he's very tall. Yeah,
It's so funny that you don't see when you just see everyone sitting down.
And he and I have had run-ins in the past. I had him on, and he started banging on about something to do with Brexit, and I accused him of sexing up the document that took us into the Iraq War, and we had the really great sort of set to, and then he would see me across the room, sort of shout at me, but sort of in a piss-takey kind of way. Right. Once I was on the air, and he leant behind my ear when I was down on College Green, and he just went, "Stop talking bollocks," which could just basically just be heard as it went out. And funny enough, I saw him at a do not long ago, and he was like, "Hi, Mike, how are you?" He's all like he's another one of those, quite friendly guys, but he's also kind of unhinged a little bit, and he can lose it. I don't know if you've seen the clip from Alex Phillips on Newsnight with him, where he looks like he's going to punch her. They're having this kind of row. And
when was that roughly?
This was last couple of years.
Oh right.
Before Alex came back to work for us.
Yeah.
And she's always asked to go on to talk about, the European Union. And he started accusing her of lying, started talking over her, was really sort of, quite bullying towards her. And that's what he's like,
What frustrates me about him, about that kind of personality, is very, aggressive, goes for people, happy to ruin other careers and things like that. And then there's a lot of sort of crying mental health as well.
Yes.
His part.
Yeah.
That I can't bear.
Because he does. He suffers from depression, it's not his fault, I suppose.
Well, maybe don't have a go at everyone else then.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the thing. You can't use that as a kind of a cape, can you?
Imagine that. What kind of person going around, but I've got mental health, everybody, but you're going to get fired and all that.
Right. But of course, he used to be an alcoholic as well. I mean, he used to be a Mirror correspondent. He used to be a Mirror, political editor. He wrote a column, and when he used to talk about the trivialisation of politics, he used to do it. He wrote a column once about John Major's underpants. And then later is going, all you journalists, all you care about is the trivia. Be more serious. Na. Rory Stewart. I mean, what can you say about him?
What can you say?
Just a really weird guy who thinks for some reason that he's imbued with some incredible kind of knowledge about politics. He gets everything wrong.
Gets everything wrong, doesn't he?
Gets it all wrong.
With a sort of, because he does that sort of Professor Brian Cox thing. But Professor Brian Cox is presumably right about a lot of things.
I don't know about Professor Brian Cox. He's another one. He's another one that's blocked me. I mean, I've got a litany of these people who blocked me on Twitter. Cox blocked me because I think I asked him a question he didn't like.
Cock-blocked?
Yeah, cock-blocked. He didn't like the question, so he just blocked me. And I was just like,
What questions were you asking him? Because he's talking about space and stuff.
Yeah, no, he's quite a Remainer though, so it would have been something to do with the European Union. Because they don't like things. They don't like being challenged. They live in this bubble, right, where the only people they talk to are all talking about the same thing that they are. I don't know if you saw Fraser Nelson this week doing his little monologue to camera. Well, no, I think he was on Times Radio, saying what a great country we live in and how people should. This is a new thing the left are doing. John Rentoul does it with me as well. Crime statistics are not what they are. They're actually, there's a lot less crime now than there was. And you go, come on, guys. I mean, I've lived in London a long time, and I've never known it as bad as this, right? And
he was using these weird statistics, wasn't he? That sort of didn't count certain houses. And
but also they use polling. When you ask people if they think it's more dangerous or less dangerous, they say it's less dangerous. And I'm like, I don't care about polls. It doesn't matter. Look at the number of arrests. Look at the number of shoplifting cases that are going on. Sexual assaults. You've got on Oxford Street now where they've got a ribbon outside of some of the shops there saying, don't let somebody grab your phone out of your hand. It's actually written on the ground to tell people not to get their phones out. But this kind of trope that, it's only the right wing that is saying that the country's going to hell in a handcart. It's really not. People's standard of living is better than it was. I mean, migration alone has completely screwing the cities of this country,
Yeah. Have you met Rory Stewart?
I don't think so. I don't think I might have had him on in back in the day on College Green. I don't remember.
What about Emily Maitlis? Because I could not believe my ears when I heard her with Rupert Lowe just call him a racist because he didn't want more migration or something. I was flat. Did you see that?
Yeah. I did. In fact, Rupert Lowe got quite upset with me because I put a thing on Twitter saying, sad to see you being interviewed by Emily Maitlis when you won't come on to talk. Why don't you come on and talk to us? You know,
I would say with Rory, I feel bad because I know quite a lot of other podcasters, and all of us and you guys and everyone are always messaging him all the time, asking him to come on. And it must just be like, I just can't.
We had him on actually not that long ago, and he was like, "You haven't had me on for a while," because I think the trouble with Rupert is he thinks that there's a lot of conspiracies going all over the place, that he's being banned from things, which he isn't. But I just thought, what a waste of time, And his line was, well, I wanted to reach a different audience. Well, why? You want to reach Emily Maitlis' audience, and that guy, Lewis Goodall. I mean, what a complete numpty he is. I mean, talk about these kind of ingenues that come out. I mean, he was a Labour, spin doctor. He was a Labour apparatchik. He suddenly found himself and now operates as a journalist. John Sopel, possibly the worst journalist of all time, another guy who wouldn't know a story if you fell on it.
Yeah. What makes him a bad journalist? Yeah.
Because they've all come out of the BBC and they go, Andrew Marr's another one, now I can speak my mind because I'm not constrained any longer by the ropes of the BBC. And you go, yeah, but you don't know what you're doing because they've been sort of institutionalised in the BBC to think that, European Union good, Brexit bad, right wingers bad, Labour good. Do you remember on election night, the amount of sort of rapturous praise that was going on? Andrew Marr, I think, went on Question Time and made a complete fool of himself. Talk about, isn't it? It's going to be so great having the grown-ups back in charge. It's going to be amazing. Suddenly we've got a proper government again, without ever judging anything that they'd done. And now look where we are. And now they're all kind of slightly lost in this sea of confusion because whenever I look at the newsagents, which I don't very often, but I see their tweets, for a long time, they're not covering. For a long time, they just covered Trump.
Yeah,
because they thought that's easier for us
so easy
because he's evil, and so everybody thinks he's evil. So we'll just make fun of him, and we won't talk about the uselessness of this government. They never talked, I don't think, about Lord Ali, which happened literally the first month that Labour were in charge. It turned out they were all getting free, getting freebies, free suits, free glasses, free trips to New York, free use of a penthouse. Still never been properly explained, right? We don't know why he got a Downing Street pass. We don't know what he was doing there. We don't know what the personal relationship is between him and Starmer. People tried to talk to him at the Labour Party conference. He puts his hand up to the camera and don't talk to me. Who the hell do these people think they are?
But that should be bread and butter for Emily Maitlis. That should be, this is what we're doing. We're going to do something that might piss off some of our own audience.
Right.
Let's take a risk.
They didn't touch it.
I couldn't believe it. And you're right, it's not just Trump, it's like Marjorie Greene Taylor or whatever, American.
Oh, yeah.
We can all go after sort of evangelical, far right, whatever. Like, it's shooting fish in a barrel.
Right.
All
I can say is I know some people that work with Emily Maitlis at Newsnight quite well.
Right.
And she was not a very nice person to work with. And which is also very similar to most of these, these ideologue journalists who all think they're brilliant. I'm being told that they're for the chop soon because they're not making any money. It's costing them too much money to actually put it all together. Wow. So we'll see what the future holds for the old newsagents. Maybe they'll cover their own demise. That would be fun. I'd watch that show.
I don't think they ever would, though, would they?
No.
It is unbelievable. And the other thing is that what frustrates me, I mean, I was just thinking when you explained about Andrew Marr and some of these other journalists, now I'm finally free kind of thing. Well, like, I mean, you've, as a journalist, you've grafted and you've gone like, okay, and what's my thoughts? Where am I going to go? Where can I get work? And I've done that. I've built this thing and I'm like, okay, what do I, they were given jobs because someone at the BBC went, oh, I quite like that. Maybe that sometimes nepotism, sometimes not.
Yeah.
So I like them. They were given that stage and now they think because of that, there's some sort of special, but they haven't done anything.
They really haven't. And if you put them out on, on a story with most, certainly newspaper journalists of my generation, I don't know about nowadays because it's a bit different now. The thing about a lot of journalists now is that they've come through this sort of academic route and they've gone into university and they've done they haven't done the kind of local newspaper thing or, maybe even a newspaper. A lot of kids used to leave school at 16 and do an NCTJ and then become journalists. And from 16, 17, 18, they were working just on stories,
Did you do that, local paper?
I sort of not quite, no, because I went to university and decided to get involved in a student newspaper in the first year that I was there.
That's similar, isn't it?
So similar. So then I got involved. I used to sell stories. I used to sort of rat people out at the student union and sell them to the local paper in Bath. There's down in Bath, in West Evening Chronicle. And I went to see the editor one day and I said, I really like to be a journalist. What can I do? And he's like, well, we can sign you up and you can join our scheme. I think it was Westminster Press. And he said, it's 3 years. Basically, you go down to Hastings and do your 1 year there and then you come back and we pay you like the square root of bugger all. and then you make tea for everybody. And I just kind of went, nah, don't think I like the sound of that. I'm just going to go to Fleet Street. And he said, you won't get into Fleet Street, you know. And I went, really? Okay, let's see. And so within 2 years, I dropped out of university and I was working doing shifts in Fleet Street. You know,
you got there. Good on
well,
you.
yeah, I just did what you do. I don't even know how I did it, but I rang up Kelvin Mackenzie one day when he was out with the Sun, knowing that his secretary wouldn't be in before 8 o'clock. Got him on the phone, and I said, I want to do some shifts for you. And he was like, who are you? And I told him, and he's like, well, you managed to get through to me, so come in and see the news editor. And that was how it started. And they gave me some shifts.
That's how I did it as well.
And that was the way we went. And then I went to America, and it kind of went from there, you know.
I did the same thing. I called up the Sun at a particular time, and somebody sort of just fobbed me off and said, oh, you know, maybe you can get shift somewhere. Or something. So then I called, it might have been Derek, or someone else, you know, and said, I've been recommended to get some shifts from you, or something, as if it was like a done thing. And then I was doing the night shift.
This is it. I mean, you need gall to get into successful journalism, you know, and to be a reasonably good Fleet Street journalist in the days when I was doing it, you know, you had to know how to get in a door. You had to know how to, you know, if you're going to wait for somebody to open the door, you know, you're not going to get the job.
Yeah. What do you think about, we talked about that kind of side. What about on our own, what we might call our own side? People who are maybe in the pockets of people who are fake, people who are just trying to hide certain aspects of their personality by getting a big viewing, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting development, isn't it? Because I'm not really somebody who's tried doing that. You know, I've had podcasts and things that have done okay, but I've never had to rely on it to make a living, you know? So I don't really know how successful people are. I mean, I assume that there are some people doing very well and making lots of money. That's what I hear, getting hits on YouTube and all of that. But, you know, I find there's a crossover between journalism and sort of polemic, if you like. And some people do it really well. Some people, if they don't know the basics of the journalism, don't really do it very well. And I think there's a lot of fake news out there, which is not a term I use in the same way that Donald Trump does. But I think there are people who exploit things which they know they're exploiting in order to get the clicks that they want to get. You know, there's a lot of that on Twitter now, where you'll see. You know, there was a video that did the rounds this weekend. I don't know if you saw it, of the dinghies being, you know, put into the back of a lorry and then driven away, and the lorry's registration number was put up, and it turns out that was an old piece of footage from 2023. But when it was originally put out, it wasn't. It was suggested that it was you know, it happened yesterday.
I see.
So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that. But if you're not being honest with the audience about what it is, then there is something wrong with doing it. You know, you've got to kind of, you know, the government are doing enough bad stuff without accusing them of stuff they're not doing, because it lets them off the hook in a way. And if you get this kind of conspiratorial stuff, I mean, you can see where it goes wrong with the whole business of Southport. And Rudy Cabana, which I don't blame. I blame the government for that to a large extent. But I think there were people who were also kind of feeding that.
Although he did have an Al Qaeda manual.
He did. Well, the police should have told us that, you know, and the police should have told us that, you know, he was actually originally from Rwanda. His parents were from Rwanda. They made out he was from Wales.
Yeah, Welsh choir boy.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about, because information is so important, you know, you've got to be responsible with what you do with it. And there's no excuse, as far as I'm concerned, whether it's people on the right or the left, you know, capitalising on. It's like we get it from the left more, I suppose, with what goes on in Israel. You know, but there's another reported killing of loads of people at an aid depot, which turns out to be complete rubbish.
Yeah.
But the BBC are reporting as if it's true.
Time and time again.
Time and time again. You know, the mainstream media are quoting Hamas figures as if they're right, and there's no kind of critical faculty. And you go, well, this is really, this is not journalism.
I am worried now a lot about that sort of conspiratorial right side and people hiding behind allegations.
Yeah.
Russell Brand was sort of the one that people worry. You know, I don't actually know enough about Russell Brand except that it was a remarkable transition from a sort of atheist lefty to an evangelical Christian right wing.
It was a bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, just right at the times that the allegations came out, and you knew that this crowd would accept him.
And you suddenly, getting baptized in the Thames, and you're kind of going, that's a bit weird. You know, I mean, I've had conversations with a lot of women who love Russell Brand, and who say, well, if you go to Russell Brand's, bedroom, what do you think's going to happen? But apparently that's not a defence. But I'm still not sure if he's done anything wrong. It's difficult to know.
It's hard, isn't it? It's hard to know if he did anything criminal.
Yeah.
But some of the stories that seem to be true, just he's walking into a toilet when someone's there and getting his willy out. And like that. That's not on, is it?
It's not really what you should be doing. But of course, he was doing a lot of it when he was working at the BBC, and they all thought it was fine. He was suddenly, producing shows naked.
Yeah. Well, this is it. This is why I say I've always criticised the BBC for that, as with Hugh Edwards, and I think our side fails at doing that to our own sometimes.
Yeah.
So if I say that,
I think the problem is with people on the right, they're not so sort of cohesive a group, I suppose, as the people on the left. If you look at, I'm sure Owen Jones wouldn't want to be put in the same category as Emily Maitlis, but they're sort of on the same side.
Yeah.
And they're not likely to have a go at each other unless it's about Gaza or something like that. Whereas the right is quite fragmented, it seems to me, in terms of,
Where do you see that fragmentation?
I think there is a genuine sort of gap between people who are proper journalists and people who are not. People who actually are looking for stories because they know that's what their audience wants, or whether they're reporting on things that are actually happening, and giving it context. I mean, that's what we try to do, is we don't look, we don't investigate an awful lot of things, partly because we don't really have the wherewithal. I mean, we ask people to send us their stories, and we ask people to tell us about things that are happening, which works well for us. But we don't really have the resources to go and, for example, follow, a migrant crime gang as they make their way from Germany through Belgium into France. We can't do that kind of thing. Some people can, and that's fine. But again, if you don't know for sure how they're doing it, or if they've got the resources to do it properly, it can be a bit misleading. And I think a lot of people on the right just don't like each other, so they just have a go at each other for no apparent reason, which doesn't really work either. It's like just do the work. Why spend so much time trying to screw people over?
It feels like there's a bit of a purity spiral. It's like you're not right wing enough,
yes.
That kind of thing.
I mean, I'm lucky in a way, because I don't know, because it's my age or whatever it is, but I don't seem to be. I get left alone pretty much by people. Most people don't really have a go at me.
I had been left alone until recently.
Yeah,
I got caught up in that and accused of not being properly on the right or something. And I just thought to that, well, I'm not. I don't know what I am.
Right.
I'm just sort of living my life. I'm not right wing.
I mean, I get very nervous around being grouped with people.
Yeah.
I don't want to be part of a group, really. I've always been on my own. I've always done my own thing. I've always been, I had the Independent Republican Mike Graham. Now I've got the morning breakfast show. I don't favour one person over another person. I don't look for, one report because it's written by somebody in particular. I'm doing the news as it is for the people that are listening and watching. I don't actually have an agenda at all. I as you'll find out later when you might ask me the question about Heretic, my interest is purely journalistic. I'm not a politician. I don't want to. People have asked me, are you going to run for reform? I'm like, no, of course not.
Yeah, I see that. I guess that's where there's a line, isn't there? There's sort of an activist side and a journalist side.
And a lot of the left and the right, I suppose, as well, a lot of them have worked in politics. Their job was as a researcher for an MP, or, they were involved in something with Steve Bannon, way back in the day when Bannon was looking at kind of crossing around the globe with Breitbart and trying to make it into a sort of a global brand.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. And I think if you haven't had the basis in journalism, it's easy to be kind of diverted, if you like, by the politics. And you're kind of actually I'm not trying to change the world. I'm just trying to report on the fact that people are screwing it up.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's wise to be wary of those who are trying to whip us up into sort of this is what we are, and anyone who's not is not in our thing. You should have people who are looking at both sides and understand the world. I think.
Because when time comes, and I do think it will come, if reform and when reform gets into power, they'll be the government then. I'm not going to sit there and, like Emily Maitlis, ignore the fact that they're screwing things up.
No,
I'm going to be going for them.
Yeah. Oh, well, and we'll be doing that together, I hope. But a few years back, I've got to mention this. You had this viral moment. It was the most viral moment I've ever seen anyone have. Even more viral than a moment I've just had. I think, well, much more, I'd say.
Yeah.
You can grow concrete.
Yes.
What were you actually saying?
Fantastic. Well, do you know, it's funny the way it all panned out was that basically I was covering for Julie Hartley-Brewer. She was away.
Oh.
And so I was doing breakfast, which I didn't really enjoy in those days because I thought, one, it's not my show. Two, I can't go to bed before 10 o'clock. I'm not a child, and I have to get up at like 4. I was like, Anyway, I had a pretty strong rule that I didn't talk to any of these bozos from any of these organisations like Insulate Britain or, Just Stop Oil or whatever it was that was going, Extinction Rebellion, because a lot of people used to love getting them on the show. and just, having to go at them, shouting at them, having a ridiculous argument. I just thought, I don't think that's very good TV. I just think it's kind of idiotic. And, that...
It is good TV.
It can be if it's done well.
But it is idiotic as well.
Well, it can be if it's done well.
Okay.
But if you, like everything, if you do it too much,
yeah,
then it's kind of like, okay, here comes the row.
So Piers Morgan.
Yeah, it's, Piers is a friend of mine. Yeah. He does it very well.
Yeah.
But I'm not always a fan of how he does it and how often he does it,
Because he's like, yeah, well, I don't mind the Jerry Springer comparison.
Yeah. No, he doesn't care. No, Piers is incredibly successful at what he does. And so, good luck to him. But I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I came in the morning, and unlike my show, which used to be, I was much more involved in, the guests that I had on my mid-morning show. They were more used to having a different sort of format. So they would book the guests. And blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it turned out they booked this guy, the carpenter, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't usually talk to these people. And they were like, do you want us to cancel it? And I was like, well, I suppose not. I said, but here's what I'm going to do. I'll get him on for like a really short period of time. Then I'll just cut him off, and we'll do it that way, right? So that was the plan. And that's kind of what happened. But I was actually not feeling very well. I think I had a bit of a cold as well. So I was feeling a bit sort of glug-headed, And he was quite funny in a way when I said to him, somebody on TikTok's just revamped the whole conversation, if you've seen it, but there's this one comedian who's playing like both parts. It's just
right.
Completely as if it's very weird. My kids showed it to me. They were like, I've seen this.
That's funny.
So when he said, well, you can't grow concrete, I just went, yeah, you can. I didn't really think about it. I just went, yeah, you can. And then I sort of stood and stared at the screen for a bit, and I just went, cheerio, Cameron. And that was it, and I didn't think anything of it, right? And
so you were you just being just like, I can't be bothered with this. I'm just
pretty much.
Say, yeah, you can.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to have a conversation with him. I didn't want him to be there telling me all about how we really needed to insulate our house. I don't care. If you're going to glue yourself to stuff, I'm not really interested in talking to you. So it was very much a throwaway moment on a sort of 3.5 hour show. And then we finished it. And I think I was going to film something shortly thereafter downstairs. And I came out of the show, and it was like 40,000 on Twitter. And I went, that's not bad. And then I went and filmed, I think it was Plank of the Week or something I was filming.
Right.
Came out of that, and it was 1 million. And I went, Christ, that's quite good. and then I came back upstairs, and my boss was there. He's going, this is great. He said, there are some people, in the building who want us to like cancel it because, they think it makes you look really stupid. And I went, I don't care. I mean, why would you pretend? I said, even it's out now anyway. If you try and kill it, it will look like we're ashamed of it or something.
Yeah, it's
right?
worse. Yeah.
So I was like, I'm fine with it, And then we kind of just built on it. And then I went into Jeremy Cole, I think that afternoon, and said, well, of course, concrete can grow. I mean, it turns out actually it can. Which is the really funny part about it, that there are people actually creating bio-concrete,
Right.
But then I started talking about things like, economies grow, would you say an economy can grow? Would you? And doing all this stuff around it. And it's still, even now, I get people coming up to me going, you're the concrete guy. Gary Lineker actually did it. He blocked me a long time ago.
Right.
And he was, less concerned about the fact that I would slag him off and, make him Plank of the Week on a regular basis. And I said to him, you don't care, do you, if I just keep taking the piss out of you and you make millions of pounds a year? What do you care? He's like, I couldn't give a top.
But he still blocked you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because that's what they do.
Well, he cares a bit then, doesn't he?
Well, you would think so.
See, I mute people.
Yeah, muting is better.
Yeah, just don't have to ever... Because then they don't get to go, look, he blocked
Which
me.
is what they do, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like a badge of honour.
Yeah.
Just mute them.
I mean, I tend to only block people who are really, really horribly abusive. And if they're that horrible, then I'll do it,
It's an interesting, it's a funny thing. I'm sure you must have had a lot of abuse on Twitter in your time. And I've had a lot of that. And it's a funny thing where, like, if you're on Twitter and you see the thing, there's a compulsion, firstly, to reply because you want to explain yourself. Go, no, hang on, I didn't mean that.
Right.
And also it gets to you. And if you just say to yourself, which I've had to do the last week, I'm just going to get off Twitter.
Right.
I'll have a look in a couple of weeks. And won't look at
I mean, I used to be much more sort of aggressive on Twitter than I am now because I'd get stuck into people and, quite often I'd go too far and then I'd get into trouble. And it was like, and so I kind of learned to ignore people, which is what I do now. I just ignore most of the time.
Just ignore it and then mute them all. And
occasionally I'll look up who they're following and who they're followed by, and quite often they're terrible perverts. And so I'll just publish all that and go, yeah, maybe you should stick to, the one-handed shandy shuffle, mate, But yeah, I mean, I'm very much of the opinion that there's an awful lot of people with more than one account who are people that perhaps we know who are having a go,
Have you got any?
James O'Brien, for example.
Do you think he uses burner accounts?
I think he does, yeah.
That's your opinion. Do we have to say that?
I don't think so. I think it. I mean, I suppose it's my opinion. I'm not saying he does. I don't have evidence to say
You
that.
probably have a better grasp of media law than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would be that surprising if people found that James O'Brien, who's apparently not on Twitter anymore, but I got into a spat with him and he threatened to sue me, and so much so that he actually sent me a legal letter,
I see.
But
I've got theories about certain people with their burner accounts as well. Very specific people who I won't mention. No,
we don't need to. And I'm not saying that James O'Brien definitely does, but James O'Brien's another one who has become kind of lost in the sea of his own wilderness and madness, because since Brexit, he hasn't really known. Brexit kind of made him. I knew James O'Brien when he was like a nothing reporter on the Daily Express, and he used to do showbiz reports for William Hickey's column, and he wasn't very good at it. And then after that, he went and did a video review column for the Daily Mail. So he's never been a proper journalist, really. And he's another one who, you hear some of the polemicist type arguments that he makes, you just go, that's just insane what you're trying to convince people of.
I'm amazed he's gotten away with it this long.
Yeah.
But it is, again, it's this thing of he's arguing with people who are just, are not used to arguing, and
Right.
I'd love to go on his show and have a word. And
Sure.
just, I'm sure you would as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
That's just not going to happen.
It's never going to happen. No.
It's just the cowardice of it, the hypocrisy of it.
But LBC's full of people like that, The other one's Sheila Fogarty. I listen because I put it on occasionally just because if I'm in the car, and I'm listening to, I just want to hear what other people are doing. And she once did a thing about shoplifting. And it was so laughable. You just kind of went, what world are you living in, She was talking about how she saw this rather unhealthy-looking guy, very thin, stealing from the shop that she was in at Sainsbury's. And he was stealing baby formula, baby powder, And she said, I felt so sad. I could see that he just wanted to, get that for his baby, because obviously he couldn't afford to buy it. And even on LBC, people ring in going, no, baby powder is used to cut with cocaine. That's why they have it. It's actually sells at a premium because that's what they need it for.
I didn't know that, though, as you were saying.
I actually didn't, right?
Yeah,
However, I also wasn't going to immediately look at somebody stealing and think that the poor guy's obviously can't afford to feed his baby. She was absolutely flummoxed and flabbergasted that anybody would suggest this. She was like, oh, my God, I never even thought of that. I never thought that he might be a criminal or a drug dealer. I just assumed he was needing, baby formula.
It's the naivety, isn't it?
They don't want to see it.
I had this with Ian Dale, who's a friend of mine.
I mean, he's one of the better ones, to be fair.
He's good and he's nice. He's a lovely man, but he's often talks about, where's it, Tunbridge Wells? Is that where he lives?
Yeah. But he nearly ran for a parliament, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah. But
that was a bit of a weird episode.
That was, yeah. It was before I really knew much about but I remember he spoke about that. He was on here.
Yeah.
He was, it's this whole Tunbridge Wells thing, and if I see a Muslim or someone speaking a different language, I'm just curious about it. It's like, because you see one out of every 50 people.
Yeah, right.
I'm living on the street where I don't see another white person.
Go to Whitechapel.
Yeah.
You won't be curious then. You'll just be wondering whether you're in Whitechapel or Karachi.
And that's where your listeners, Ian, mostly are living in places like that.
Yeah.
It's that naivety I just find startling because these are smart people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and it's like, but multiculturalism is great because we've got all these Lebanese restaurants. Well, fine, but
now that we've got the recipe, Mike.
But also that's the upside. Let's talk about the downside. Let's talk about the amount of crime that's going on. Let's talk about, of course there are people that live here and have lived here for decades and centuries who have committed crime. Yes, of course, but we don't need to import it anymore.
I was doing Rowan Atkinson. I don't know if you've seen that. It was a skit he did years ago.
Yeah.
He was sort of.
He did some very funny stuff.
He was pretending to be sort of a conservative back in the day. I guess it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
He says, immigration, blah, blah, but now that we have the recipes, the implication being, it was very funny.
Very good.
I've got another question to ask you, but where can people find your work, your channel? Where do you want to send them?
Well, we've got YouTube, which is where we do an awful lot of good business because you can watch the show on YouTube. And also we put a lot of clips out on YouTube as well, which is kind of the go-to thing. We put Twitter as well, or X. I mean, I still call it Twitter, but it's X, obviously. You can find me at IROMG which stands for the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Other people seem to think it stands for Iron Mike, which I've never called myself.
I thought it was that. I thought you might be a sort of, is it West Ham's they call it Iron?
Yeah, no, I'm not a West Ham fan, and I'm not Iron Mike. It was the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, which started as a show in Scotland when I first got into radio in like 2007. Also, Talk has got its own platform. If you've got a Samsung TV or a what's the other one, LV, they've got a channel that you can find us on, and you're thinking, what, you can still watch it on TV. People, bizarrely, we're not allowed to tell people this, on because of Ofcom rules. We can't say it. We're not allowed to say it's on a TV channel, but it is.
Right.
That's kind of mad. Then
it's on a TV, but it's not a channel. It's an app.
It's an internal app inside the TV kind of thing,
Are you subject to Ofcom?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because we're a radio station.
Well,
so
what's the problem there? Is it?
I know, you wouldn't have thought. It's complicated. But so we're on DAB Plus, which is another thing that we were on DAB when we started. We got some really good numbers, and then we got moved away to DAB Plus. And then also, like I say, there's an app that you can get from the App Store, which is called Talk. There's a podcast daily from the show that you can get. And also, I do the Thought Police with Kevin O'Sullivan.
That's right.
Which I think you've already seen Kevin in here, haven't you?
Yeah, lovely Kevin.
That comes out once a week, which is a bit like this, except a lot more sweary.
Yes. I want to do some ad swaps with you guys.
Yes, he was saying that. Yeah.
You know what annoys me about the Talk TV thing? I told Jeremy Kyle this as well.
Yeah.
The thumbnails, when it's you live,
right.
it just says Mike Graham live, and it's just a blue square, and it's your face. I want to know I want to see something about what's going to be on that show.
Yeah.
And they don't. They just put the same default thing. Just Jeremy Kyle, just you.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that guys like yourself are much better at is the kind of mobility, if you like, of your product. Because when you work for a big company, it's a lot more difficult to get things done.
It's bureaucracy.
You've probably got one guy that you go, can we do this? Make that happen.
I often do it myself.
Or do it yourself.
Or I'm up at like 3 a.m. checking the latest video, how it's done. Do I need to change the title? Do I need to change that? It's the only way.
And that level of engagement is what makes you a success. Whereas
you can't do it as a company.
As a company, it doesn't really work because you've got too many moving parts and too many people. I can say, like, can we do this? And then, like a week later, we go, have we done it?
Yeah.
And if you forget, or if you don't remind people, you go, "Did you do that thing I asked?" And it's kind of torturous. And we could be better. We could be a lot better at that. And hopefully, in time we will be. But we're working a lot with the Sun now as well. There's a lot of crossover between what they do. I write quite a bit for the Sun now as well, and do bits and pieces for the Daily Telegraph online. When they ask me occasionally, and it's usually pretty much, what anti-Starmer piece do you want to write this week? But so there's a lot out there of stuff. And I would also say to people, go back into, YouTube and go back to 2019, where there's some great interviews with me and various different politicians. There's one with Lisa Nandy, which is one of my favourites, where, she's obviously in opposition, but talking about the agreement with the European Union, whether we have one or not. And it's kind of 15 minutes of nonsense where I'm saying to her, well, have we got an agreement or not? And she's like, well, we've got an agreement at the moment, because we're still in the European Union. I said, yeah, but you just said we didn't have an agreement. And she goes, well, yeah, but we want to get an agreement. I said, yeah, but I thought you said we had an agreement. And it just goes backwards and forwards like that.
I've seen
Very
that.
funny.
I feel like I've seen
Very
that.
funny.
What?
And in the end, she goes, I think you're just trying to be difficult. And to which the mother of my children said, she should try living with you.
I like that. Who's a heretic you admire?
It's going to be Ben Bradley, who's the former editor of Washington Post, because Watergate basically was one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to get into journalism. I was a teenager in the mid-70s and wasn't as aware of it as I became a bit later on, when All the President's Men came out, with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman. And I just thought, here's a guy who took on the entire establishment, but properly. He basically brought the Richard Nixon presidency down as a result. And when you read his book about how it all happened, and he was like, for any journalist, and I wanted to be one at the time when I was reading it, he said, there's all these Cuban Americans. They've all gone in to break into the Democratic National Headquarters. They've all been arrested. They've got a book, and in the book, they refer to William Hunt, who worked inside the White House. And when Bob Woodward called Hunt and called the number and said, "Can you please explain to us why your name is in the book of the Watergate burglars?" He just said, "Oh my God," put the phone down. At which point Bradley went, if you don't think that's a story, you shouldn't be a journalist, you know. And the story was denied and denied. And so to me, it was a real lesson in not being one of those journalists that accepts the status quo, that wants to go to the White House dinner parties, that wants to go to Downing Street and, you know, hang out with the Prime Minister. And you basically go, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm asking you questions. I'm going to find out what you've been up to. I think you've been up to no good. I don't care about your bloody dinner parties. I don't want to go to them. I just want the story. And that, to me, is proper journalism.
That is proper journalism.
Yeah.
People, go and follow Mike Graham. Go and have a look at his TalkTV and go back into those previous ones as well. We'll put a few links down below for you to check out. Hit the like button and... Button? I said it like American. Button. Hit the button that is there. Not a button. We're not hitting a sort of button there. And keep watching the show.